Well, it seems to me from watching YouTube videos of moms packing fancy lunches for the kids, these bento-style lunch boxes are really popular for the real kids. So I thought it would be an awful lot of fun to create one for the dolls. Stay tuned and see how fun and easy this project is. All right, our first step on our project will be actually to make a pattern that we are going to use throughout the project to create our lunchbox. So I'm going to start, what I've got here is some 1/4 inch or 4 squares to the inch graph paper. I find this just makes it quicker and easier. You can use plain paper by all means, but for me, using graph paper like this to do a project, it just makes it so much easier to get everything parallel and squared and just the way I want it, especially when I go to round the corners here in a minute. And this is a free printable. I will try to remember to have the link for the printable that I used. It's from a place that I've gotten free printable papers from for years and years and years. I've never had any problems with his site, and I feel very comfortable downloading from there. So I made a square. Now I'm going to make my rectangle that I'm going to base this on. And my rectangle for my base is going to be 2 inches by 2 3/4 of an inch. That's right. There. That's 3/4 of an inch. That's 2 inches. There. Now I have my box drawn out. I'm trying to draw hard enough that you guys can see it. Now I have my glue stick here because I'm going to use my glue stick to glue this piece of paper to a piece of cardstock to make my pattern. So I'm going to use the base of my glue stick to round my corners. This way my corners are all the same amount of round. That makes it nice and neat. And you could just use this piece of paper as your pattern, but I find that it's floppy and it's hard to trace around a single piece of paper. I have much better luck and get much better results when I glue this to a piece of heavier paper, and then I can trace around it much easier. And I've got a reusable pattern, so if I like the project I've made and want to make it again in the future, that makes that really easy to do. So now I have my glue stick. And you don't need a real secure glue for this. Just a plain old glue stick is fine. This glue stick doesn't work very well, but for this it'll be fine. Now, this is just a piece of craft color cardstock. Any color cardstock will work. This was laying on my table because it was left over from a project I did a few days ago. So I am going to leave this to dry for 5 or 10 minutes, and when it's dry, I'll come back. I'm going to cut around it, and then we're going to start constructing our lunchbox. All right, so my glue is dried enough that we can start using this. So we're going to cut it out, just using a pair of scissors. And we are going to use this several times on our project. And we aren't going to be cutting all our pieces at once, because I find when I cut all my pieces at once, I tend to have problems with keeping track of everything. So the first paper I'm going to pull out is this. This is actually some 140-pound watercolor paper. You need something pretty thick, thicker than regular cardstock. This is going to form the very top and the interior top and bottom of our lunchbox and give it some structure. If you don't have this, you could use the back to a tablet. You could use like a cereal box or something like that. You need something that's heavy enough that it's going to provide, like I said, some structure, because this is going to have some stress on it by the time we're done. And this is what's going to keep this nice and keep our lunchbox nice and sturdy. And you won't need a lot of it. You'll only need this. Oops, I forgot to trim that corner. Forgot to trace that. So I'm going to cut these out. And then we're going to start playing with our pretty papers. So let me turn the camera off and get this cut out, and then I'll be back. All right, I have those all cut out, and now I have my papers I'm going to be using. I have two colors of solid color cardstock, a pale yellow and a blue, because they both go with my decorative paper. And this is a lighter weight scrapbook paper. Anything that you think your dolls would like. Now we're going to put I'm going to put the blue and the design paper over to the side. This one happens to be a 12 by 12. You could use an 8.5 by 11, would be just fine for this. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to set this so that I can actually cut and have the camera here. I need to cut a strip that is 2.5 inches wide. And you can make this by the 11 of an 8.5 by 11. Mine's going to be 12 because, like I said, this is a 12-inch paper. And that's all right. It doesn't matter. You just need to get it cut so that it is a 2.5-inch strip. And now I forgot to bring my table knife over that I usually use to score with. So I need to turn the camera off and go retrieve that. I'll be right back. All right, if you have a real scoring tool, that works really well. I don't. I lost mine when I moved, and I haven't bothered to replace it because for most of what I do for crafting, for my card making, it would be handy. For this, it doesn't matter. So I've got just a table knife, and I'm just on my self-healing mat, and I am going to just draw that line down, that knife down. Ew, that's gross. That did not clean in the dishwasher. Ew. To run that back through anyway. All right. And then a 1/2 inch. Oops, that's not straight. I wanted it straight at a 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch from each long edge. All right, now I'm going to bring my my tile back that I work on. And I'm going to fold on those lines. Off camera, I'm going to cut another piece, but I'm going to show you how this works with one. And then I will go ahead and cut the second one and do the very same thing with it. But it's going to be a different dimension. All right, so we're going to fold this up so that it looks like, oops, we're going to try and fold on those score lines we just made. There we go. Now this needs to be glued. And I prefer tacky glue for this because we want it to hold up. We don't need a lot. I do want to find a craft stick that I've been using to spread glue and paint. I'm just going to kind of spread this out. The dimensions for all of these pieces we're cutting and photos will be on the blog post. So be sure and hop over there after you watch the video And you'll be able to see how big everything was, and you'll be able to see photos of how I did things. Now be sure you keep these flaps loose. Don't fold it. You want to fold those back so they don't accidentally get glued. We just want to glue this part. I'm going to turn the camera off. I'm going to let this set up, and I'm going to cut another strip just like this one, except it's going to be 1.5 inches long or wide by the width of my paper. And when that's done and folded and dried, I will come back and we will move on to the next step. All right, this is the piece that we folded on camera. This is one I did off camera. This one is cut 1.5 inches wide, and then it's scored 1/2 inch from each edge and then down the center, which leaves me just a 1/4 inch piece here that will be folded, that is glued together. So now we are going to start working on putting this onto one of our bases. And I'll do just like this. I'm going to do this part, one on camera, one off. So this wide piece is our base, and this color, by the way, is the interior color of my lunchbox. So for the first side, we are going to go down and we're going to clip pretty regularly the whole length, because I don't know where the corners are going to come on this. So I'm going to, off camera, cut this entire flap on this. This is the flap, not the part that's glued. I'm going to go down, I'm going to cut little wedges out of this all the way down. When I get that done, I'll come back and we'll start gluing it onto one of these pieces to form our base. All right, now that this is cut, I didn't go all the way at the end because I know I won't need the whole piece. I am going to kind of run my finger along here and kind of give this a beginning curve. I'm just kind of making it so that it's not completely straight anymore. Now I do want to find the middle of my piece of paper. So this is 2 3/4, so I'm going to mark. It doesn't have to be the exact middle, but I want to be close to the middle so I'll know where to start, because this is going to be where the pieces are going to join together on the back. And I am going to line this up so that it will stand straight up like this, and I'm just going to glue this first little bit right now, because what I want to do is get this part really anchored onto my piece of watercolor paper, or whatever my heavy paper is. Like I said, you could use cereal box, you could use the back of a tablet, you could use a piece of poster board, you could use any number of things as long as it's a heavy weight, because it has to be able to support this. Now I am going to get out a clamp. I'm going to have to use my big ones. Make sure that this is lined up right along the back and clamp it. And I want this to get dry, or as fairly dry. All the way dry is best. So I'm going to get the other piece, the lid, caught up to the same step, and when this glue dries, I'll be back and we can move on to wrapping the rest of the way around. All right, that glue's had plenty of time to kind of dry and get set up so it won't shift around. The main thing is you don't want that to shift. You don't want this part to shift when you're working on the rest of this. So now I'm going to lay some glue out along here and make sure that your corner is nicely done. I have enough glue under that one. And then off camera, I'm going to proceed all the way around and bring this up to the last edge. So I'll let this glue set. It doesn't have to set all the way, but I want it to be a little bit set up so that I can go along here and then along here. And I'll get this part done, and then I'll come back and we'll do that this final section together. And I'll do this piece also off camera. So let me get that done, and when it is, I will come back and we will do that last section. All right, this has been glued around, and the glue is fairly well dried. It doesn't have to be all the way dry, but you want it dry enough that it won't stay together when you're messing around with it. So I'm trying to get these kind of organized so that I can run this around, line it up like it's going to be when it's glued, and then I'm going to use my pencil and draw a line. And then just past that line, keeping in mind that there's a little space there taken up by the pencil and everything. There, now it fits really nicely. Line everything up, get those down. And you might have to hold this. There's really no way to clamp this one, so you might have to hold it. Looks like I missed gluing that little piece there. So put a little glue under it. And I'm going to hold this and let this glue set up until it's going to stay. When that's the case, I'll come back. I'll show you what we need to do to the bottom side of this. So I'll be back in just a little bit. All right, now that this is glued and this is set up enough it's not going to move around, we're going to turn it over and we're going to work on the bottom. And again, I'll work on this one at least partway through on camera, and I'll do the lid off camera. Now, because now we can see where the corners are, we only need to cut out notches around where the corners are. We're taking the notches, in case I forgot to tell you and you didn't know, the reason we cut the notches out is to reduce the bulk when we're trying to make the corner with our paper. Not sure if the camera picked that up, but that piece of paper just flew like 2 feet past my shoulder. That was weird. I guess I'm going to be sweeping when I get done here. All right, now, and it doesn't have to match perfectly. We are where that seam is. We are going to cover that and reinforce it. I just wanted to make sure it was as close as possible there. Now we're just going to run a bead of glue around here. And whoops, that one is not. I need to cut a little more of a notch there. Doesn't want to go around the corner. I was trying to, if the camera picked up, it was kind of buckling there when I was trying to go around the corner, so cut a few more notches. Now this part where this is folded over here and here, that's never going to show. Those are going to be covered up pretty much all the way when we're done. So we don't really have to worry about it looking really neat. We just need to get it glued down as tight as possible so it doesn't make a lump underneath the next layer of paper. I almost said fabric. All right. I'm going to kind of mess around with that, make sure I keep pushing those edges down. I'm going to do the same thing to the lid. And I'm going to let that glue dry pretty well before I go on to the next step, because I don't want that sticky, because I need to turn it over and have it sitting the other way on my table. So I'll be back when this glue dries. All right, the glue is dry, and this doesn't have to be perfect because we are going to cover it later when we start putting the outside on our box. So what I've cut is 2 pieces of the same cardstock that are 2 inches wide by 3 inches long. And what I'm going to do is find my knife. And I'm going to just give myself a little space. Oops. Trying to go straight across. Because what we are going to do with this is we're going to glue it over the back. This will reinforce because this is really loose. And we don't want that to be loose. We don't want this to fall apart. We don't want the weak spot there. And this will be, so this will kind of make the back look a little more put together. And this is why that cut didn't have to be exactly perfect. I'm actually just going to leave it on there and clamp this with a couple of these little clamps. I've got it centered as best as possible, and I'm going to let this glue set up, and then I'll come back and we'll go to the next step, and meanwhile I'll also do the lid. So I'll be back when this glue dries. Alright, the glue is set up enough that it's not going to move on me, and that's really all you need. And then fold it around, get it as tight as you can without bending the walls, and kind of, and then glue it down. And don't put on too much glue. You don't want the glue to get the paper all yucky, and the bottom is going to be covered with a base. Once we get that bar, we are going to cover the bottom with the outside color of paper. So I'm going to let these dry, and then we can start working on the inside of the bottom and the top. Alright, the glue on that has dried, and if you handle these, you'll notice they're a lot more sturdy. All of a sudden, this isn't floppy at all. With this held in place that way, this has become really sturdy, kind of like our bamboo steamer that we made a while back did. Now, what I did off camera is I took my same pattern and I cut out 2 liner pieces that are going to go in the lid and the base of our lunchbox. I cut slightly inside the pencil line, and that one, it looks like I got it pretty well. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can, and I just trimmed it just a hair inside. Now, before we glue them in, we're going to draw some guidelines. And we need to keep in mind that when our box closes, it's going to close like this. So this is the front of the base, but this is the front of the lid. So our pieces need to correspond, and it's going to be kind of, once I get it put together, I think it'll be really easy to picture what I'm doing, but you'll just need to have these mirrored. So I'm going to draw some guidelines. I'm going to start, keep in mind they're just under, what are they, 2 3/4. So I'm going to go over, an inch and a quarter, and I'm lining up my grid so that my lines will be straight. But if you don't have one of these grid rulers, that's okay. You don't have to use the grid ruler. But it's a lot easier to draw these lines now than it will be later. So I'm going to make 4 compartments in my lunchbox. This side will be a single opening, and this side there'll be 3. So now remind myself how deep this is. About 2 inches. So I'm going to go right at about an inch and draw this. And then I'm going to, and this part is, it's about 1.5 inches. So I'm going to go over 3/4 of an inch from there. I'm going to make 2 fairly equal size sections. Now, this was 1 inch, so I need to draw my line at 1 inch, because that's going to be halfway. But the thing I have to remember is that my divided part is here, because when we glue the box, when we hinge the box, that's how it's going to come that way. Now I have my guidelines for my dividers. So now, and you need to make sure that you have this glued the correct way with that, because that is your back of your box. I know that's probably as clear as mud right now. I'm hoping I'm not confusing you guys too badly. I didn't have my glue sitting upside down this time. My glue bottle's getting kind of empty. I think I need to buy some more. Either need to buy some more glue or refill that bottle out of my big bottle. This one still has quite a bit in it. So I'm going to spread the glue on the back side. And then I have a craft stick here that I can kind of spread the glue out. I would like to have it come a little closer to the edges than I've laid it out. Now I want to make sure that my open side of the single side is on this side of the lunchbox, because I've noticed when I look at these boxes online, almost always the large compartment is on that side. And almost always these are two smaller ones. If there's divided into four, there's two smaller ones here and one bigger one. Some of the really cool ones have a round compartment, but I tried to put that in and it just didn't work. This lunchbox has gone through several versions before I got to this one. I've had several failed attempts at making this. Now, line that up. And why did I draw a line there? I don't know. You guys saw me draw that line too. And nobody said anything. There we go. So now they line up. I can visualize that when I close the lid, those are going to be the same. And what's going to happen, so to give you guys a heads up, once we get the outside of the box put on, we are going to cut strips and make divider strips in this section. And this section we're going to cut just flat strips and make what looks like a gasket like these boxes would have. So I'm going to let that set up. I have some other things I need to do, and when that gets set up, I'll come back and we will start putting the outside of our box on. So I'll be right back. All right, this step is optional, but I do highly recommend you do it, and that is I cut a piece of the same color as this, my inside color, and I'm going to glue it. I used my pattern, and I'm just going to glue it over this. This is going to do a couple of things. Mainly, it's going to even this surface out so that in our next step, when we glue on our decorative paper over the top of this, you won't see all these lumps and bumps. I mean, you don't have to do this part, but I do recommend that you do. It will make it look so much better and more finished. Those thinner papers have a bad habit of really emphasizing every little bit of unevenness under them. So I spread some glue. And you're never going to see this piece. It's there to just, like I said, even everything out. So I'm going to actually turn this direction and put my bottle of glue in it. Actually, no, I'm going to reach over and grab a couple of bottles of paint that I have on my table from another project from my other channel. And I'm going to use those to weight this down a little bit because I want that to be stuck nice and tight. So when that glue has a chance to get at least partway dry, I'll be back and we will go on to our next step. All right, now we're going to add our decorative paper, and I do like to have a lighter weight paper for this. I think I mentioned earlier. You can use a printed cardstock if that's what you've got, but it is nice to have the lighter weight. You'll see why here in a second. So rather than cutting that to size, I'm going to cut it after it's on, because the reason I'm putting it on now is I want to bring it down around the edges to cover the top edge. I kind of played with several options on this. This was one of the steps on this project. It took me a little bit longer to get it the way I wanted it. And let's see. Make sure you leave yourself at least a 1/4 inch. I like to leave a little extra space than that around the edges. You're not going to be able to precisely place your design unless you can see it through. I suppose if you put it like up to a window, I can see. I kind of want this to kind of go over the edges. You can kind of see I've got. So I am once again going to just stick these little bottles of paint in here. They're just to add a little weight, because if there's a little bit of weight in here, it's going to make that attach a little quicker. So once the glue is set up enough that this won't shift, I'll be back and we can go to the next step. All right, that glue is pretty much dry. I'm going to go ahead and cut around this. And we're going to trim it again later. Now I'm going to cut up to the edge, just on the corners. And don't worry if your paper buckles a little bit. Most, if not all, the buckling will go away when the glue is completely dry. A lot of people panic when they see a little bit of buckling when they're gluing things, and most of the time it will go away. All right, now I'm going to go around and pull this up so that it is nice and tight against the box. And this is going to take me a while. I may not even do it all in one sitting. As I get to places like this, after the glue dries, I'm going to trim this back so that it is even with the edge, because we don't want it sticking up past. The outside of this is going to be covered. We're never going to see this edge again. We're going to see this part, but we won't see this part. So I am going to continue around with the glue and get this all the way up and glued on, and when that is set up, then I'll be back and we can move to the next step. All right, while this is drying, we're going to start working on the outside of the box. We're going to start by cutting some strips, because we need to cut these from our paper before we cut the bottom, just so we know we have enough. So what I have here is 2 strips. One is 1 inch wide by the 11 inches length of the paper, either 11 or 12 depending on your paper. And this one is 1 3/4 of an inch by the length of the paper. I have scored both of these, this one at 1/4 inch from each long edge, this one at 1/4 inch from one edge, and 3/4 of an inch from the other edge. And then we're going to fold these up. And we might need to trim this wide one a little bit, but I want to make sure that I've got enough covered that I won't have any edges showing. Now I'm going to need to, well, I'll trim it after I get it glued. So this one I'm going to go ahead and run some glue. And then I'm going to put some right here. We want a folded edge at both long edges when we're done. That's the whole idea here. And if we have to do a little trimming, that's okay. Now I am going to clamp this. I dug out some extra clamps yesterday. because you want this to glue pretty flat. And this one, I've always got glue on my fingers. This cardstock is really thick, so it can be a little challenging to get folded, even with the scoring. Just be patient, put some muscle into it. And it doesn't matter if this back side of this one meets or not, because the back side where the two edges are is never going to show. This is going to be glued onto our lunchbox. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll get this started to be glued so that the edges want to stay down, and then I'll stick it under my work tile so that it has pressure on the whole length if I find that it's buckling a lot. It's totally optional to do that, but I find sometimes that makes for a better edge. All right, those are going to go off the side. Now I cut a piece of the blue paper just so it'd be easier to work with. And rather than using our pattern, which is now a little bit smaller than our box, we are going to just glue this onto and you do want some glue around the edges on this. And by putting this on now and then trimming it even with the paper, it will be a little neater. Now we'll have one more piece to add before we add our outside edge, but we need this glue to dry so we can trim, and then I'll be back and we'll go on to our next step. Alright, so off camera I just trimmed this up close to the edges. I am going to add a little more glue in a second when we do our next step. I thought I had the camera on and I didn't. Now I'm going to carefully cut this. Around the edge, because we don't want paper. We don't want this paper coming past, and we need to be very careful not to cut our yellow or whatever your inside cardstock is. You just want to be cutting off the paper that is the lid color. If you leave a little bit, it probably won't show too badly, but try to get this as neat as you can. There. All right, then here I have a piece of cardstock. This is the color of the exterior, of the same color as those pieces we just folded. And this is a 2-inch square, and I have scored at 1/4 inch from two opposing sides. This will be our hinge. Now, we're going to line this up, and we're going to line it up with this. At the same time, I'm going to go around and I'm going to make sure that I have glue holding this whole base. My base is trying to pull away a little bit, and that's okay. That's easy to fix. It will have paper on the outside of it, and by the time we get done and we put some Mod Podge over everything, it will be okay. So now we're going to add some glue. And you want this on a nonstick surface because this absolutely needs to line up with the base. And then again, when we do the top side, it will need to line up with the top edge. I am going to clamp this with my long clamps because I need that to stay in place. Now this is optional. Now make sure that you are gluing to the side that has that reinforcement. That's the back side, remember. We need this to be the same so that our inside lining will line up. Make sure that this is centered. And off camera, I am going to do some really careful measuring to make sure I have this set so that it is exactly centered on both pieces. Well, I could probably set it on top of one of my rulers and do that on camera so you see what I mean. Let's see if I can get this where I can see it and the camera can see it. All right, I've got this lined up and it's at a 1/2 inch. I've got it lined up here and it's at a 1/2 inch in. So that means that these two pieces are lined up. Now that glue will need to dry and be pretty well dried before we go on to our next step. And by that time, our exterior wrap pieces should be also dry. So then we will, when they are ready, I will come back and we will move on to the next step. All right, this glue is dried. I want to show you the bottom. These are flush with the lid and with the base. And that's really important for this to work. Now, I've already off camera kind of bent these, making sure that the seam area is in. And this is the short, this is the narrow one. And this one is going to go on the bottom. This is our bottom outside, and I'm kind of lining it up with the middle as best I can, and I'm going to clamp. And it's really important that this lines up with the bottom here. You want this to be lined up like that because you don't want anything to show past it. And I'm only going to go a ways on camera, and then off camera I will finish. And because I don't have enough clamps to do both the top, the lid, and the base, I'm only going to do one, and then I'll come back and show you how to start the lid after this one is done, and don't need the clamps anymore. When I get to the end, I'll come back and show you how to get this trimmed off so that it's even. So I'll be right back. All right, I've worked my way around, and now I'm going to take my scissors, and I'm going to cut it what I assume is going to be a little bit long first, just in case. And it actually turned out to be exactly where I want it. Go long first because it looks like you need a little bit less than you actually do. Now, I don't actually have glue under the whole thing. I really need to refill this glue bottle soon or get a new one. So now I am going to clamp this. I'll use a nice heavy one to make sure that end stays. I'm going to double check that everything is lined up, and if you may have some spots where this shows. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. When this dries, because this is all of my, I have one more clamp left. When this dries enough, I can take the clamps off. I'll come back and we'll put the rim around the lid. If you find it is sticking, you might want to put some parchment paper under it so it doesn't stick and tear the base. I'll be back when the glue is dry. All right, I've taken my clamps off. The glue is not completely dry, but it's dry enough that this is staying put, and that's the important thing. Now on this one, it looks a little messy, but that part's not going to show. And I got some extra glue on there by accident. What I did was I went through and I cut back my ridge, the lip of that so that it's back away from the top edge so that it won't show when I put this on. And now we're going to put this wide one around the top. And it's really the same steps. I'm going to use my bigger glue bottle. We are going to put some glue around our lid. And this one we need to keep it all lined up and get this on and clamped. And then this will also need to set up for a little bit. And once the clamps can come off of this part, then we can put our dividers in here and our faux gasket into that one. So when I have this come across here, I'm going to clamp. That was great. Just stuck my fingers right in the glue. Yeah, I'm pushing down so that this is coming in contact with my tile, as well as snugging up really close to this. And when I show you how that looks on the back side after we trim this, I'm going to show you the mistake I made on the base. I'm just going to leave it, but if it bothers you, you can, I'll tell you how you could fix it. Depending on if your lunchbox is going to be seen from the bottom. Mine's just going to be used for photos. I'm going to trim off a little bit more because that's not... Okay, I got a little gap, but that's okay. What we can do is we can put a little, we can cover that little gap I just created with a piece of paper. So that will be something I can show you how to fix. I was probably going to do that anyway, simply because it makes this seam a little stronger. So let's clamp this. I'm going to show you how this looks on the back side. This is nice and level. Now here, this was trimmed back a little too much. I'm going to, see, this is nice and level. Not sure that was under the camera before. This is trimmed back, I trimmed it back a little too short. You've got two options. You can leave it because it is the bottom, or you could, actually you get three options. You could cut another piece of paper and glue on here and then trim it with the edge. Or you could use some matching paint and paint that. I'm just going to leave it because mine won't be seen from the bottom. If I was selling these, I would put a whole new bottom on the over the bottom of it. So now that this is nice and level, and yeah, that's got a few wrinkles, but that's all right. It's minimal and it's not really going to show up that much when it's done. So I'm going to let this glue dry because I don't want to disturb this too much and have this come loose. Once this is set up, we are going to add our dividers in here, and we'll add a gasket, and we'll add a little cover over this seam just to cover it a little bit. So I'll be right back. All right, I've taken the clamps off of this, and now let's make a little piece that will kind of make this look a little neater and give it more strength. What I have here is a piece of paper of the same blue that's the outside. And this is cut 1.5 by 2, and I have scored it at about 3/8 of an inch. I measured to see how far I needed to be to clear that. And I'm going to now trim it with my scissors. It doesn't have to come all the way down to the bottom. It's going to cover, and I'm going to cut just a hair off of that. And now that is going to cover that little bit. It will give some strength and it will kind of cover up our error that we made in trimming that. And that's okay, that happens. A lot of times when you're trimming these, they do come out a little short. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. So that needs to dry, and in the meantime, we're going to make the dividers for the bottom of our inside bottom of our lunch box. So we need to go back to our interior box color, and I've cut a strip that's 1.5 inches wide by about 8 or so. It doesn't matter, as long as there's more than about 6 or 7 inches, it'll be fine. So I'm going to fold this in half. We're not going to use all of it, and we're actually going to need to trim the width. I scored it approximately in the middle. It doesn't have to be exact because this is going to be trimmed to fit the interior of our box. I know that the interior is less than 3/4 of an inch in height. And that's just a little marking that was on my paper. We're just going to ignore that. We aren't going to use that part. And I'm going to clamp this so that, in fact, I'm not even going to clamp it. I'm going to stick it under my tile so that it dries a little faster, so it goes flat a little faster. I'm going to give that glue just about 15-20 minutes to set up enough to work with, and then I'll be back and we will add our dividers to in here and probably our gasket to our lid. So I'll be back in a second. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is work on the lid. So off camera, I pre-cut a few pieces. I cut a piece using our pattern from our exterior color, and then I drew a line about a 1/4 inch in all the way around and cut out the center. I have a 1/4 inch wide strip of the same blue, and I'm going to use these to cover my strips there, my lines. So I'm going to go there. And this is just going to act as, it's going to look like the gaskets that are in the real lunch boxes, because these, usually in real life, these have a little rubber gasket up in that lid to keep them from leaking. And you don't have to add this to your doll size one if you don't want to. It's just, I kind of like the detail. I think it looks really cute. I'm trying to figure out where I laid my little scissors. This is going to fit perfectly. If your pieces don't go all the way to the edge, it's okay. You're going to add the ring shape last, and that will cover the ends if they don't quite meet. It looks like my strip was maybe not perfectly straight, but it's fine. Trim that, that's a little too long. I knew I should have checked it. And remember, we are going to cover the inside and the outside of our lunchbox with some Mod Podge to seal it, so that will cover up any glue mess that we have. And if you do use a pencil to make your lines, be sure that that side goes to the bottom. And there, that makes it look like it's going to seal. So now let's add our dividers, and those will be made out of our interior color. We just made those a little bit ago, so I am going to cut this piece the size that this is. And then I'm going to test fit it. Okay, I've cut it a little long. I'd rather cut it just slightly long than too short. I can always trim more off. I can't add it back on once I cut it. And now I'm going to take a look at this, and I need to cut just a little bit, probably about the amount that I didn't overlap. And I still need to cut just a hair off. This is one of those where every time you make this, it's going to be slightly different because your paper is going to lay just a little bit different. Like mine will probably be slightly different than yours on the inside, simply because the paper is not perfect. This is not a perfect science. I'm going to put a good strip of glue there, and then on the ends. And if you wanted to, you could just leave yours without dividers at all. If you wanted to, you could just leave that an empty, you know, an open container. But I like the dividers. I think it makes it look really cute. And as all right, now let's cut. That's really crooked. I managed to cut that one kind of crooked. So let's I'm going to need to trim it off. Let's see if this is going to fit. Yes, it is. And I like to put the glue on the base, inside, and then on the ends of the divider to go with the vertical. I'm trying not to stick my head under the camera, but still see both sides of that. And now let's go ahead and cut. How close did I guess? Got it pretty close. Let's see how it goes. Oh, a little bit more off because I don't want to move that. Now, if I wasn't doing this on camera, I would have drawn those lines a lot lighter to guarantee that they won't show when the lunchbox is finished. Like, I recommend you guys draw your lines very lightly with your pencil. But I wanted to be sure that you could see them at home on the video. There, that's better. And now this glue needs to dry before I can add the Mod Podge, because I don't want to seal my glue underneath Mod Podge that has not set up, because if I do, there's a good chance that this glue will never dry all the way through. So I am going to give this several hours to get nice and dry. I will come back a couple of times and make sure that these have not moved. But when this is dry, I'll come back and we will put a layer of Mod Podge on. Alright, so there's a couple of spots in here that are not quite dry, but they're almost dry, so I'm going to first make sure that this is going to close. Let's see, we have. And it will be a little stiff and a little hard to do the first couple of times, so work with it, be patient. I'm going to start putting the Mod Podge on the outside of the box, and then by the time this is dry, then hopefully these little areas here will be dry. So I'm using a satin finish Mod Podge. Because that will make it look the most realistic of the different finishes I have, I think. So I'm just going to carefully put the finish on. I'm not going to do the sides yet. I'll do the sides in a separate, so that I can hold on to the bottom and get really in there and get those sides. So I'm going to try and leave as few brush marks as possible. You'll have less brush marks the softer your brush. If you use a foam brush, sometimes that helps a lot in not having brush marks. I've had bad luck with foam brushes the last couple of times I've used them with my Mod Podge though. It looks like I'm putting on a lot, but I'm not. I'm spreading it out. I'm just trying to make sure that I get these little areas, so I get the Mod Podge kind of running down those areas. I want to seal that. So don't get too much Mod Podge, because pooling can cause it to stay cloudy. And I know some people do dry their Mod Podge with a heat gun. I prefer not to, because I have found sometimes it doesn't dry evenly when I do that, and then I have issues with the finish later. So I'm going to let this dry, and when it does, then I'll show you some secrets about getting these sides done, and we'll move on and just do this in steps. So I'll be back when this is dry. Right, these areas are dry enough that we can now turn this over and handle it. So now, and it looks like I did run over. If you've got spots that you ran over, kind of get them off. And I really want to concentrate on making this a thin coat. And any spots where the paper is trying to peel away, go ahead and coat that and kind of encourage the pieces to go back together. But don't leave big globs of Mod Podge. So I'm going to finish that. I'm not going to put any, oops, except for what I just dribbled in here because I've still got a couple of spots that are not completely dry on that glue. And I don't, like I said earlier, I don't want to seal that and have it not dry properly. Now I've got a spot of my paper here that's trying to peel, so I put a little extra Mod Podge on it. All right, time to clean the brush and let it sit until this part is dry, and then we will coat the inside of our box. All right, and now you can see it's starting to not look like paper. Now when you are in here doing the inside, a couple of things to keep in mind. You need a thin coat because you don't want to make this so the lid doesn't fit down, which there's not a lot of extra space. They're going to fit pretty snugly. Also, if you've got any areas that maybe didn't stick down with the glue, go ahead and get some Mod Podge under there and kind of smush it down. You might have to come back a couple of times. Now in here, the same. Here you don't have to be as worried about clearances because nothing fits. This won't affect fit on this side. Try not to pool your Mod Podge in the corners because you want it to cure completely and correctly. But I am going to go ahead and let this dry, and then I'll come back. I'm going to try and locate some stuff to put in here so you can kind of see what it looks like with a lunch in it. But I'm really happy with how this turned out. I hope you are too, so I'll be right back when this is dry. All right, the Mod Podge is dry enough that I feel comfortable putting the lid on temporarily. Now, it might be a little tighter putting it together the first time, and I haven't put it together since I Mod Podged it. I want you to see it is stiffer. Everything stiffens up. This is stiffer because it's got the coat on it. There's a little more resistance around these edges because they're just a teeniest bit thicker. But work with it, open and close it multiple times, and it will start working just fine. Now I would recommend storing this open and allowing the Mod Podge to cure for at least several days before you close it and leave it closed, or you might find it impossible to open it again later. Mod Podge takes a while, I find, to really get cured and not stick to itself. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Be sure and check the blog post because I'm hoping to get a blog post written that details some of the trials and tribulations of getting this video done. I apologize for missing a couple of weeks. You would not believe how many times I have made this project, and this is actually the second filming of the entire project. I'll talk about that in the blog post. So I hope you enjoyed today's project. I hope you learned something. If you did enjoy it, please hit the like button. Leave me a comment. What would you like to see on a future video? If you haven't subscribed and you enjoy my content, hit that subscription button and the notification bell so you know when I put up a new video, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.